tell you what, the fan's put in a shift today. 40 degrees in, just above Sydney here, so working hard. And I'm going to stay inside as much as I can. But we're going to be going through in this video the difference between fantasy and Supercoach and why you should play both, basically, because they are very different games in a multitude of different ways. And why not? It's fun to have two teams, one for fantasy, one for Supercoach, and you can employ different strategies in both because the scoring system is very, very different, and the positions and the players you might want to target are very different as well. So let's start it off quickly with the difference in the amount of players. So for fantasy, you do have 21 players with the 4 interchange and the 4 emergency players. And with Supercoach, there's actually 26 this year, which is pretty wild with the addition of the flex. So 5 players extra, $1.8 million extra as well, 10 million compared to 11.8. So there are a multitude of differences in gameplay because you have so many extra players. You're sitting there with an extra 4 players that aren't going to count to your score. You could say 5 because now with the new addition this year, it is 17, the best 17 of your 18 starting players. So they had the top 17 with your 4 reserves plus the flex player, which just makes it your best 17 of 18. So thanks to the people that did ask to see a video like this. I hope that it helps you guys. And maybe you do want to have a look at playing both because I am doing content on both. If you just follow my channel mainly and my podcasts, and make sure you do go check out the podcast. All of the videos, the audio to the video will come out sort of 3 to 4 hours before each day at the moment, in the preseason, especially when I can, when I'm able to do that, setting it up for each day. So do go ahead and check that out if that's easier for you. But the 26 players, it just means that you've got so much more flexibility with issues that come up around head knocks, around injuries, around buys. You don't have to worry too much about the loading up on certain teams. Positionally, things can be very, very different. You've got the second row forward position with 6 players there. You've got the center wing position with 7. And you have a lot of these spots here with fullback only having the 2, potentially 3 this year with the flex, and that can be helpful. 5/8 only has the 2. Same with halfback and same with hooker. And that's where you need to have a look at making sure you are pretty well set up in that position, which you could say the same thing with fantasy for the hooking position. But each of the other spots there, they have 2 in the starting side, and then you can have as many as you want on the interchange. You can have 1 hooker and then in the starting team and 3 on the interchange. So you'll have to think about that a little bit different when it comes to Supercoach because you can only have the 2. Again, it is made a little bit easier this year with that flex player, but it is only 1 across all of the positions, unless they're a dual obviously there as well. So you can muck around that, and that's going to be more helpful across the season for sure. When you are looking at the bye period, this is the biggest similarity between the 2 games right now, in that with fantasy, we do have the starting 13 for each of the major buys. That's the exact same with Supercoach, apart from the fact it's your best 13 of your 17 players. I think it's the 18 this year with the flex. So yeah, it'll be the 18 with the flex that you can have, but you're not going to have that many or need that many anyway. But you're looking at a difference between the best 13 or 13 starters in fantasy. So they have to end up being able to be on this starting field or be looped into that starting 13. Whereas it doesn't matter if you don't have a halfback in Supercoach for the bye period. You can just have someone from your bench that's got a reserve on them from the second row forward. They can count for that halfback. It doesn't matter in that sense. For the minor buys for Supercoach, it is 17, but again, it's 17 out of 26. So that is 9 players there that won't be used in those games. Whereas for us, in our normal round in fantasy, when I say for us because it's the one I've played the longest, it's 17 out of 21. So you've only got 4 guys there that you can muck around with not playing and have the odd guy with a concussion, the odd guy with a bye, the odd guy with an injury, a couple of guys on a bye, whatever it is. So you do have to be a little bit more selective and making sure that you have guys that are playing. Green dots in fantasy is much more important than green dots in Supercoach because you can have a few guys on that bench that aren't even playing. They could be out for 4 weeks each. You could have a cheapie there from the start that you're like, oh, he'll play at some point, and you can do that. Whereas it's very, very difficult to do that in fantasy. So there are a couple of the big changes, obviously, with the amount of players, given it's 5 on that front. And then the 17 out of 18 allows you to take a little bit more of a risk at times as well. You could be like, oh, he could get a 90 or a 10 if he scores a couple of tries, or he doesn't. And you go, oh, I'll just play him and hope for the best. And if it doesn't pay off, then that score will drop out, which is completely fine. Or at least if you had 2 10s, one of the 10s drops out and you don't get killed as much as what you would with fantasy. The looping is very different. In Supercoach, you're going to get your lowest score from your bench, is going to be how that one works. But again, with that one, it could be your lowest score off the bench. But the looping situation this year is a little bit different, given that if a low scorer came in off your bench, they're likely to be your 18th man in that scenario and fall out of your side anyway. So looping is a little bit easier this year. It was harder in previous years, whereas in fantasy, they do have to come in either into that starting 17 somehow. So if you have a guy and you're just looping with a non-player in the interchange, then it'll be your first emergency that comes in. Simple as that. If the looping is in your center position in the starting side, then if the non-player is there, then it has to be a center from your interchange or emergency to come into that center spot. It can't be any position, whereas that's how it is with Supercoach. It's your lowest scoring player from your emergencies, basically, or the non-reserve selected players, which is fine as well. There are a couple of interesting things, and let's just go through the biggest scorers now, the place where you get your best scoring, because attacking stats in Supercoach are more than double, by far in some instances, what it is for fantasy. So you look at your attacking players is where you want to be, and that starts with the fullback position. It holds the majority of the best scorers in the position in the game. So Kalen Pong is at 80.7. He's 5th best, which is pretty crazy, and then Tedesco's at 94 at the top. You look to guys like halfback, they're going to be a very attacking position, and Cleary, Hughes are the 2 over 80, and we've seen Hines drop down a little bit with the 75. So these guys, well, especially Cleary and Hines, were upwards of $1 million last year, and had averages up in the 90s as well. So that's the other really, really strong position. And they're 2 positions where you can only fit 2 players in each. The next one is going to be your center wing, which is very, very different to fantasy, given it's one of the lower scoring positions, but you do have a multitude of guys 70 plus. So To'o down at 7, all the way to Val at 80. But as I said, fullback is the strongest there, with 5 guys over 80, and Drinkwater likely to hit that with goal kicking this year. So fullback, halfback, and center wing are the spots you want. And there's obviously a lot of guys that can be 60 plus in that position and do a really good job. 5/8 is solid at times when you've got some different guys in the mid to high 60s. And then you go to the second row forwards, which has a lot more players, and it does have a bunch over 70. But again, it's not as important as what it is in fantasy, with the front rowers, a few in the high 60s and 70 mark. Actually, a slightly better scoring position than 5/8, which is pretty funny how that one's played out, with a few guys that are tremendous in base stats and tremendous at scoring the footy as well. And the hookers are pretty average for the most part. You've got a few guys in the mid 60s to 70 with Grant, but outside of that, it falls away pretty quickly into 50s and 60s, with try assist from dummy half helpful. That's kind of the main way they score, unless they can be try scorers. So that's where you want to put a lot of your money: fullback, halfback, and then center wing and second row forward, and really a little bit less in front row forward, the hooker especially, and then 5/8. So hooker and 5/8, the lower scoring positions. Whereas fantasy, if you're looking at the best scorers, you want to look straight at the mids. So you've got Isaiah Yeo, you've got Payne Haas, Fanua Blake, Carrigan. All these guys can get into the mid 50s and above, which is really helpful. You then go to halves, so you have some great scorers in Cleary, Hines, Hughes. In Supercoach, you don't get kick meters, but you get a tremendous amount of attacking stats extra. When your tries are 17 and your try assists are 12, compared to 8 and 5, line break assists are up at 8 compared to 2. It's a tremendous difference that you're going to see there. Goals, if you're a good goal kicker at 80%, you get 4 for a make, -2 for a miss. So you are going to net better with goal kicking as well in Supercoach. But mids and halves that can collect base stats. So halves with their kicking in general play, most of the goal kicking obviously as well, 2 per hit. and tackles and runs gets you a lot of these guys to 40 odd before they get attacking stats and offloads, tackle breaks, and all the rest. So they're the two positions you want to look at. Generally, edge can have some good years, but it's no one over 60 this year, which it has been in the past. Whereas centers, you've got Farnworth that had an incredible year, Gagai, and then you've got Lucas as a back rower in the centers, and Lomax had a tremendous year. He was one of the best players in Supercoach last year, but averaged 30 less for fantasy. So you're looking at these types of players that are solid, but they're not going to make or break your season. Similar to that in the hooking position, it's mid-50s in fantasy there. Edge was solid. And the wing fullbacks, they can get up there. You saw Latrell, you saw Teddy, you saw Edwards, Ponga have incredible seasons, but it's still mid-50s, and it's not that 60 plus that you can get from someone like Isaiah Yeo at a 65 this year, who can have the odd attacking stat, but has a tremendous amount of base across 80 minutes of footy, which is incredible. So if you are looking to play Supercoach, safety is less of a thing, upside is more of the thing. And looks like this year, especially through that bye period, you want to continue to look for upside, less about guys that can get you a 50 or a 45 or 55, whatever that is, and more about guys that can get you closer to 100 in those weeks, and always pushing for upside, always pushing for upside. From a fantasy perspective, with the 21 players on the park, you want safety and you want predictability a lot of the time. And that's where these good middles that aren't changing role regularly, Yo, Haas, if you can spend the money on those types of guys, Hopgood, Cam Murray, Tarpane, you see those guys get 50 plus very, very regularly. And, Terrell May this year, Cotter's fairly solid, Connor Watson, these types of players can be really helpful to have that consistency, so that, the other positions like center and stuff where it's sort of 20 or 50 and these types of scores, which really can cook you, and your bench, especially when you've only got 21, if you've got a few guys out, then you're playing guys that you're not super excited about. Whereas if you've got a couple of guys out in Supercoach, you can still have players in your, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20 even at times that can hit you a 90. Whereas a lot of the time, the last few spots on your bench in fantasy, you can't actually get to those type of scores. It's like, oh, please hope for a 35, which again, we're pushing between different types of scores between the two games. But there's some of the, the critical things for sure. That's where you should be spending your money. It's in different spots for the different games, and always looking for upside compared to looking for consistency with a chance of upside. Obviously, like if you can get an 80 or 90 in fantasy, it's gangbusters, but it is coming from the Pongas, the Yos, the Haas, these types of guys that are consistent, that have that upside as well. Prizes are obviously different as well. With fantasy, it's a big trip, couple $1,000. Second, a little bit less than that, obviously. But there is $1,000 prizes for each month. So, almost eight grand to give away through that. So you have something to look at on that standpoint. For Supercoach, there are weekly prizes as well, but you are looking at top 10 is where you need to be in Supercoach. But again, that can be very, very hard to achieve. And if you manage to get super incredibly lucky, in the top 0.001% to make that top 10, then you can get in the cash. But if you're not, then you're playing it for fun, right? That's the point. You're here to beat your mates. So wherever your mates are playing, if your mates want to play some Supercoach, great. If your mates want to play fantasy, awesome. You've got a couple in each. You've got one group here, but you do like playing the other. Play both. It's not that hard to play two teams. If you put a little bit of time into it, if you're watching videos or listening like this, then you're probably going to be, someone that has enough time to make a couple of trades each week. And if you are studying a little bit like this, you'll be able to look at your fantasy team and go, oh, yeah, these guys are cool for this week. You look at your Supercoach team. Oh, wow, these guys have got upside. Go for that. These guys have got some safety on fantasy, and just play it like that and test yourself and see how you go. And I think it's really fun to do it both ways. And that's why I personally have done that properly over the last bunch of years, which is good fun. And coming into the third year of making Supercoach content to go alongside the fantasy stuff, and I'm getting better and better every year and learning lessons each and every year. I think it's a really fun way to do it. It also gets you practicing making good trades as well. You sit down and have a look at it, and even if you make a mistake, you're learning each and every time. And that's why I play the Supercoach NBL this year and Supercoach Big Bash as well, is that you can learn how to get a good starting team, how to get, make the right trade, how to determine whether a guy's a sell or a hold, or is this guy a trap, or all these types of things you can learn by playing both games. And you're also in it to win it in both games as well. There's no reason why you shouldn't. At least give Supercoach a crack or give Fantasy a crack from that first few rounds and make your decision from there. If you have an absolute shocker, then fair enough, you can quit it if you like. But I think it's a really cool way, as I said, to get better at fantasy sports is to play both and enjoy it that way as well. So guys, I'm going to pop the league codes for Supercoach and also for Fantasy in the description, along with the private group information if you're interested in seeing the big top 10 analysis in preseason and get some one-on-one help and everything like that from the squad in there, then go check that out. And as I said, make sure you do subscribe and check out the podcast as well and get those notifications on so you know when videos are coming in. I hope the hooker guns analysis was helpful for you guys, and 32 days away now from ball one. I can't wait for it. And thanks so much for being here for the differences between Fantasy and Supercoach. And I hope that you do have a crack at playing each game. For further in-depth analysis on strategy, I will be doing a video on that for Fantasy and for Supercoach very, very soon. But they are the clear differences and the best ways to go about it.